All right, ready to dive in. Today we're looking at this incredible conversation between Ryan Reynolds and Andrew Garfield.
Oh yeah, from Variety's Actors on Actors.
Exactly. It's like a
And
masterclass in acting, but
there's
also
two, right?
totally. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
these guys are just so open and honest about their journeys and their craft. And
Their struggles too.
yeah, and it's not just your typical Hollywood small talk,
No
it gets
kidding.
deep.
Well, and right away you can tell Garfield is kind of trying to figure out Reynolds' humor.
Haha. Yeah. He even admits to being a little hesitant to laugh at first. Like he's
Uh,
thinking, is there something more to this? Am I missing something?
Yeah, is there some deeper meaning behind the joke?
It's interesting, though, because it makes you think about how we all use humor.
Right.
Hmm.
Is it a shield or a way to connect?
Maybe both.
Probably.
But what I found fascinating was how they both start to kind of peel back those layers.
Oh yeah, Reynolds talking about his dad, for example.
Oh, man.
He describes him as a man of few words who mostly communicated in like Clint Eastwood grunts.
Like, how do you even respond to that as a kid?
Seriously.
It's so different from Garfield's upbringing.
Right. He talks about his mom's love as this constant source of warmth and support.
It was like his baseline.
Yeah. But what's interesting is even with that really loving foundation, he still talks about this idea of like inherent woundedness.
Like, we all enter the world a little broken.
Yeah. It's a powerful concept, isn't it?
It really makes you think about how that shapes us.
Our choices, our relationships, our
Everything. And it leads right into Garfield's current focus on these soul projects, as he calls them.
He's all about pursuing work that truly resonates with him now
Which makes sense. He had this realization about life being short and
and wanting to make the most of it.
exactly.
I think a lot of people can relate to that.
For sure. But he contrasts that urgency with what he sees as this cultural trend toward numbness.
Oh yeah, he talks about that.
Like, we're so bombarded with information and stimuli that we've become desensitized to the weight of life.
And he sees art as this antidote to that.
Like a way to wake us up.
Exactly.
He even praises Reynolds' Deadpool and Wolverine for doing that.
Which you might not expect from a superhero movie, but he talks about how it's actually full of nuance and heart.
Woven right into the humor.
And speaking of Deadpool, I love how Garfield is just fascinated by how Reynolds managed to pull off such a meta, self-aware superhero film.
Breaking the fourth wall in a comic book movie, it's risky.
It is. So how do you do that in Hollywood? How do you balance artistic vision with the demands of this massive studio system?
Especially with a huge franchise like Deadpool,
Yeah,
right?
you can't just go completely off the rails.
Well, Reynolds kind of frames it as this matter of trust.
Oh, interesting.
Like, he had to convince the studio to invest in his vision, but then also deliver on that investment.
Both creatively and financially.
It's high stakes. And can you imagine walking into a room full of executives and being like, trust me, this superhero movie is also a comedy that breaks the fourth wall?
I can't even imagine.
It's wild.
Well, and he even talks about how in earlier projects he felt more like a monkey rattling a cage because he had less creative control.
So he realized if he was going to succeed or fail, he wanted to be the one calling the shots.
His words, he wanted to be the architect of his own destiny.
It's a powerful statement, isn't it?
It is.
So it seems like there was this real shift in his approach.
Absolutely. It wasn't just about getting a role, it was about shaping the whole project.
And figuring out how to navigate that system.
Which takes us to his journey from those earlier roles, the ones that were maybe fulfilling but not commercially successful, to strategically choosing projects that really connect with both critics and audiences.
Like he cracked the code.
He learned to work both sides of the room, as he puts it.
And that's where it gets really interesting because at that point, it's not just about luck or talent, it's about strategy.
It's about understanding the industry.
Knowing when to take a risk.
And finding that sweet spot where your artistic vision aligns with what audiences want and what studios are willing to back.
And honestly, that's a lesson that applies way beyond Hollywood.
You're right. Whether you're a filmmaker or a musician or a writer, you have to figure out how to navigate those same forces.
It's giving me a lot to think about.
Me too.
And we've only just scratched the surface here. There's so much more to unpack in their conversation.
It's wild how Reynolds just makes breaking the fourth wall in Deadpool and Wolverine work.
Garfield was super curious about it too.
Oh yeah, he was asking about how it worked logistically and what the studio thought and everything.
Like, how do you push those boundaries in Hollywood, without freaking out the people in charge of the money?
Well, and I like how Reynolds doesn't shy away from talking about the business side of it.
He's not afraid to admit that he wants to make sure the studio makes their money back.
Which makes sense.
Totally. It's a huge investment.
But he still managed to make these films that feel so uniquely him.
Like he's found this perfect balance between his creative vision and what audiences want.
It's a tough thing to do.
And it makes you think about the future of the Deadpool franchise, right?
Yeah, what's next?
Well, Reynolds seems pretty content with the idea of keeping things special.
Not just churning out sequels.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He even talks about how his family life is a priority for him now.
Yeah, I get that.
And he mentions how Disney, who owns the franchise now,
Right.
they were actually really supportive of his vision for Deadpool and Wolverine.
Wow.
Only had to take out one joke at Bob Iger's request.
Ugh, come on. Now I want to know what that joke was.
Don't we all?
But Reynolds is keeping it a secret.
A man of his word.
But get this. He actually pitched a Deadpool Wolverine movie 5 years earlier.
What?
Yeah, and he wanted to do it in the style of Rashomon.
Like with multiple perspectives on the same event?
Yeah.
Whoa, that would have been so different.
So cool.
He also admits to throwing out some crazy ideas just to see what Marvel would bite on.
Like what?
Like a film with no special effects, no conflict, just like a straight-up Sundance movie, but with them in superhero costumes.
You're kidding?
So,
That's hilarious. Sounds like he was really testing the boundaries.
but hey, it worked. They trusted him enough to let him make Deadpool his way.
It all comes back to taking risks.
He even talks about this idea of faking it till you make it.
You know what, though? That makes me think.
What's that?
Doesn't that sometimes lead to, like, being inauthentic?
That's a good point. How do you balance that confidence with being genuinely yourself?
I mean, I get wanting to push yourself, but I wouldn't want to feel like a phony.
Yeah.
I think what Reynolds is getting at is that it's more about trusting yourself even when you're not totally sure.
Like believing in your abilities even before you have all the proof.
Exactly. It's not about pretending to be someone you're not.
It's about having that inner confidence.
He even encourages his kids to be okay with sucking at something at first. Like embracing the learning process, the stumbles along the way.
That's such a good lesson.
It is. And it reminds me of that story Garfield tells about rehearsing for Angels in America.
Yeah.
Talk about high pressure.
Right. He's got this huge role in this Tony Kushner play.
And he even has a personal connection with the playwright.
And then, after a run-through, Kushner just can't even look at him.
Ouch.
Garfield feels totally inadequate.
It's brutal. But what does he do?
He goes to the edge of the Thames and just stares into the abyss.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like contemplating his whole life choices.
And then...
Instead of giving up, he decides to use that shame, that feeling of inadequacy as fuel.
Talk about it, turning a negative into a positive.
It's incredible.
It really speaks to their whole conversation about resilience, doesn't it?
Like, how do you deal with those moments when you feel like you've completely messed up?
We've all been there.
And Reynolds is right there with him saying, those moments of self-doubt are just part of the human experience.
They're universal.
So it's not about avoiding them.
It's about learning to move through them.
So basically, get comfortable being uncomfortable.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Because those are the moments that push us to grow.
They make us stronger.
Man, this conversation is just packed with wisdom.
Seriously. And we're not even done yet.
They go even deeper into the importance of risk-taking and authenticity in the last part of their discussion. I'm still thinking about Garfield going to the edge of the Thames.
Oh, yeah. Heavy stuff.
But the fact that he turned that experience into motivation,
It's amazing.
instead of giving up, he chose to lean in.
And use those feelings of inadequacy as fuel.
Powerful, right?
It makes you think about how we frame failure.
Like, what if we saw those moments as opportunities for growth instead of setbacks?
And Reynolds is right there with him, saying those feelings of self-doubt are totally normal.
They are part of being human.
Part of the creative process.
So it's not about trying to avoid those feelings.
It's about learning how to move through them.
It's almost like they're giving us permission to be imperfect.
Embrace the messiness.
That's such a relief, honestly.
I know. It reminds us that the path to success isn't always this straight line.
There are going to be detours.
Bumps in the road.
Exactly, and that's okay.
It's all part of the journey.
So how does all this tie back to their work, though?
I mean, we've talked about vulnerability and resilience and risk-taking.
How do those themes actually show up in their films?
Well, Reynolds talks about how both Spider-Man, No Way Home, and Deadpool and Wolverine deal with these bigger cultural conversations.
They're not just mindless entertainment.
They're engaging with the world around us.
Reflecting the issues and anxieties of our time.
Exactly. It's like they're using their platform to do more than just entertain.
To connect with audiences on a deeper level.
And I love how Reynolds highlights Garfield's ability to captivate viewers in such a wide range of films.
From intimate character-driven stories like We Live in Time
to massive blockbusters like Spider-Man.
He can do it all.
And I think that versatility comes from his willingness to be so vulnerable on screen.
To really tap into the whole spectrum of human emotion.
Which takes a lot of courage.
It does, and it brings us back to that idea of authenticity.
Bringing your true self to your work.
Even the messy parts.
Exactly. And I think that's something we can all learn from.
Man, we've covered so much ground today. It feels like a masterclass in navigating life and art.
It really does. And what strikes me is how down-to-earth both Reynolds and Garfield are.
Totally.
Despite their success, they're still so relatable, so human.
They don't shy away from talking about their struggles and their doubts.
They're not afraid to admit that they're still figuring things out.
Which is inspiring, right?
It is. It reminds us that we're all works in progress.
That the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
yeah,
I'm left with a sense of hope.
Me too.
It's inspiring to see these two incredibly talented guys navigate the complexities of their craft and their lives with such honesty and humor.
It makes you want to step up your own game, you know?
Take more risks.
Embrace those moments of vulnerability.
And really go after the things that light you up.
Exactly. So I'll leave you with this question. What creative risks are you willing to take?
What are you holding back on?
What would it look like to truly embrace your authentic self in your work and in your life?
Those are things worth thinking about.
And if you want to hear more of this amazing conversation, I highly recommend checking out the full Actors on Actors episode with Reynolds and Garfield.
It's a real treat.
It is. And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.